We're delighted to have one of the most celebrated car designers of the modern era as our interviewee for the Apex today, Ian Callum, with some of the most iconic British car designs to his name, including Aston Martin DB7, the Vanquish, the Jaguar F-Type, P-Pace, and more recently the I-Pace, last year's World Car of the Year. He needs little introduction. Today, we're going to talk a bit about how his passion for design began, his design philosophy, hear a bit about one of my all-time favorite Aston Martins, the Vanquish, and how Ian's new business is remastering his original design into the Vanquish 25 by Callum. Ian, thank you so much for joining us, and let's begin.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Yep.
You were brought up in Dumfries in Scotland and became interested in design at a very young age. How did that interest first come about, and what drew you to cars specifically?
I don't really know. My grandfather, who lived in Edinburgh, was a great lover of cars. I think he must have encouraged me. I was one of these painful children that could tell you the name of every car and its origins at the age of about 3. I'm afraid, boring everybody around me. But I think part of the appeal was the fact my father never had a car till I was about 6 or 7 years old. And although he was a lawyer, but he used to take the bus to work in the morning, which was quite strange by modern standards, but that's what he did. And so I think it was the aspect of the unobtainable was more exciting than what was on the doorstep. So, and I grew up in a small provincial town. The most exotic cars I saw were probably Jaguars. A lot of the professionals drove Jaguars. There was one guy with an Aston Martin DB5 or even a DB4, I think, in those days, and he was actually a farmer when farmers were wealthy, obviously. And so, I just grew up a love for cars, but I started off drawing at a very young age. I used to draw things around the house. I remember that quite clearly. I used to draw the Hoover. I used to draw anything mechanical. Even when we got a TV, I would draw the TV set. And I just loved drawing things which were obviously mechanical or electrical. And I discovered cars, I think, probably fairly early on and started drawing these as well. And I remember seeing a 356 Porsche go past. And it must have been in the late 50s. A new car then, of course, and a silver one. And I just thought to myself, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to design those objects called motor cars. And that's where it started. I must have been about 3 or 4 at that point. So it was a very young age. Yeah, indeed.
Fantastic. And am I right in saying you actually did a design which you sent to Jaguar at the age of 13 or 14 years old?
Oh, I did a number of designs. And in those days, I started trying to emulate what I thought the fashion was from various sources. And I was a great lover of Jaguars even then. And of course, GM cars as well. And there's a reason for that. And because they were the American GM cars at the time were fabulous. And Italian cars. And so I did what I thought were ideas for Jaguars, and I sent them in to William Haynes, who was the chief engineer at that point, the vice president of engineering. And he replied twice, actually. So I never had the privilege of meeting him, but I certainly feel very honored to have been part of that world even then, So Jaguar became very much close to my heart at that point. They responded to a letter, and I felt part of the family, and that's what drove me to the brand eventually.
Superb. And I know obviously characters like Sir William Lyons and Malcolm Sayer with the D types and C types, some amazing, and obviously William Haynes as well, some amazing designers and characters. And at the same time, when you left the Royal College of Art and went to work for Ford, you ended up as design manager for Ghia in Turin. You're one of the great Italian design houses alongside Pininfarina, Zagato, Bertoni, and Italdesign. Have these well-known design houses influenced your own unique design style? And is there a specific designer that stands out for you?
Yes, I always loved Pininfarina design. I mean, one of my favorite cars is the 250 short wheelbase, which was Scaglietti, and I think he was at Pininfarina at the time, but it was certainly of that era. And there was a certain purity about those cars, which I completely understood and I admired, and still to this day. And even if you looked at a lot of British cars or even French cars, all the British Leyland cars, or the BMC cars, were designed by Pininfarina. The Peugeots were all designed by Pininfarina. They had a cleanliness and a sort of honesty about them, which I could appreciate. So, and that sense of simplicity and clean design really influenced me. But of course, the great influence of inspiration was Giugiaro. And I remember going to visit him when I was a student. I'd be about 19 or 20 at the time. And I never met him again until last year, which was quite interesting. But and he complimented me on my design work, which I found very flattering. So full circle. But yeah, Giugiaro Ital design was really a huge influence on my thought process at the time. Absolutely. So Italian, I lived in Italy for a while. Both my sister and brother have lived in Italy as well. They speak fluent Italian. So there's a strong association with Italy in our family. And growing up in Scotland, we have a lot of Italians live in Scotland. So, that sense of romanticism, I think, runs through both nationalities.
Yeah. And certainly in the past, there's been some fantastic pairings. For instance, you look at the DB4 GT Zagato, British car with an Italian body, and just comes together beautifully, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
but of course, even the you look at the Aston Martins 4, 5, and 6. They were Italian design. They had a restraint and kind of almost conservatism about them, which was very British. And I think the Italians involved at that point in designing these cars appreciated their nationality, and they wanted to bring a very British feel to them. So they brought the purity of Italian design into a kind of British genre, which was great combination.
Interesting. You talk about purity of design, which I think is a really interesting idea. You're certainly in architecture and indeed in nature more generally, there are certain ratios, such as the golden ratio, which determine pleasing dimensional relationships between, for instance, the width of a building and its height.
Sure.
The final result is a building which feels entirely in proportion. With car design, are there similar ratios or patterns you have to keep in mind?
Yes, absolutely. But I don't think you do it consciously. I think if you design car after car, they become instinctive, and I think you find that way of what you feel comfortable with. But the thing is about car design, as with buildings, you have to have a sense of exaggeration about them as well. And I think to give the excitement is you take the sense of perfection, but then you exaggerate some aspects of it. So that sense of pure proportion all the time is not always going to work. You might just end up with a mundaneness, which is too familiar. And so I always try to put an exaggeration into some form of my work, whether it be the belt line or the length or the lines themselves or the size of wheels. Of course, that's a very obvious exaggeration that all designers love. And so that sense of discord or exaggeration, as I call it, does prevail. It's important to give the car some character.
Mhm.
But underlying of all that, yeah, proportions are very important. But I think the way it relates to the ground is also very important. The way the car sits relative to the ground. That's something that, unlike say an airplane, which is surrounded by fresh air, a motor car relates to the ground that it sits on, and that's how we see it, and that's how we perceive it, and that's how it belongs to the world. And that relationship is hugely important. When we go on about proportions and stance all the time, it's such a well-read phrase these days, but it's important, And you look at some of the old cars, and the stance of the E-Type was terrible, actually. But other areas of it, forgive it that, But in modern cars, it's very important to have cars that relate to the ground properly.
Interesting. And traditionally, when I think about car design, I imagine someone with a blank piece of paper who starts sketching out ideas, and the form of a vehicle starts to evolve from there. These days, given all the different software and technology available, has the basic pencil and paper still got a role, or has it all been superseded by software?
No, it's still got a role. I mean, these how you get from idea to the end result. The process may be slightly different, but the thought process is exactly the same. And you have to think of ideas in your mind, and then I still sketch. I sketch all the time, and that's my medium. A lot of young designers go from Sketchpad, and they still use Sketchpad. My design team at Jaguar, we're all sketching initial stages of any idea, along with myself, and then that would transfer into these fantastic renderings you see done in Photoshop. Again, that's just a technique of illustration. It still requires sketching, and then it goes into a three-dimensional model, which is a much quicker process than it was when I started. And once we get a three-dimensional model, we then still have to go back into a full-size clay model to kind of assess it, in a kind of human proportion way, and walk around it, touch it, feel it. And that's still a big part of the job, is changing the car in clay form. And most cars are still designed that way. So The human touch is still there, believe you me.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And and when you're designing a car, you talk about accentuating certain aspects. Do you think it's important that someone has sort of responsibility at a high level for all the different components which go into the form of a vehicle? So obviously there's the bodywork, but then you mentioned the wheels, the lights, the rake of the windscreen, the wing mirrors, exhaust pipes. There's so many different elements that go into the composition of a car. Do you think it's important that one person holds the pen on the full design of a vehicle, or do you think it can be done by different people?
Well, it is in actual fact done by different people because you have engineering, you have package engineering, you have mechanical engineering, and all these elements have to come into the remit or the objective designing a car. Now, most car programs are run by project management and program engineers actually. And then the designer converses with those engineers very, very closely and hopefully negotiates a sort of vehicle that they want to see coming out of their end. So it really is teamwork. I think in design terms, it's good to have a leader with a consistent point of view that carries a brand through with some sense of I wouldn't say repeatability, but certainly something that's recognizable. And that can change obviously through the generations. But I think it's important to have somebody leading the team through specific thoughts and ideas that relate to the brand. That's very, very important.
Yep.
Otherwise, you get these different designs that really have no relationship to each other. So a design boss is important, yes, but also the chief engineer is important as well. And the way they communicate with each other is hugely important. And you can tell when there's angst in a car where the designers have not got what they wanted, the engineer has ruled over the packaging or whatever it is. And they're very good cars and some of them are very beautiful, but you can tell by the dimensions and overall shape that they're born out of metrics rather than emotion. And then what happens, you see a lot of surfacing going on in the car because that's the only part left to designers to play around with is the surface of the car. It becomes very ornate and very complicated because they don't have the privilege of messing around too much with the profile. I'm glad to say at Jaguar and indeed Land Rover as well, Range Rover, but Jaguar in particular, we always had the privilege of negotiating the overall shape of the car, which is exactly where William Lyons was coming from. He always felt that Jaguars had to be beautiful, and that starts off the proportions. And so he would compromise certain things in order to get the car to look as beautiful as possible. And that still prevails. It's a battle sometimes, yes. Not everybody agrees with you, but that's part of being a designer, I suppose.
Yeah. Of course, one of your most famous designs is, of course, the Aston Martin DB7. While you're at TWR, but for me personally, the Aston Martin which I was most excited about when I first saw it was actually the Vanquish. I remember seeing the Vanquish design for the first time, or I think it was technically the Project Vantage concept in green, which became the Vanquish back in, I think it was 1998. And I just fell in love with its purposeful design. Indeed, it's probably the only car I remember exactly where I was at that moment when I first saw it. Going into a maths lesson at my school. What were your influences for the Vanquish, and how did your vision for the car differ from the DB7?
Well, it was quite interesting because Bob Dover was the managing director of Aston, and Bob and I have since, of course, become very good friends. But he challenged me and he said, look, we need a more muscular car to replace the V range, which, of course, was the Virage and that range of cars which had to be replaced. And so he asked me to build a more muscular version. So my influence in that car really was the Zagato in so many ways, and also to some extent the 250 short wheelbase Ferrari, which was always a favorite of mine because it looked like it had real energy in it. And it's difficult to explain these. If people get it, they get it. And if they don't, well, it's difficult. But if you look at the lines of that car, like the Vanquish, they look like they're trying to get somewhere. They look like they're moving forward. They look like they've got some energy in them. And that's what I wanted to capture. Obviously, the Zagato is there in the rear haunches and the rear fenders or the rear wings. Very much that sort of Zagato DB4 GT influence, but taken to a kind of more modern time, as it was 25 years ago now. But the interesting thing about that time is we only had one design review, and you talk about having one view and one vision. This really was one view and one vision. It was mine, and we had one design review with Bob Dover and Jack Nasser, who was then chairman of Ford and or vice president of Ford, and they really left the car to me to create, and nobody else interrupted, and we just made it. So there's sometimes an advantage in being autocratic with these things and letting them happen. So that car is full of spontaneity. And part of my job is to capture the spontaneity of the first designs and hold on to them as much as I can through the process. That's really what my main job always was. But with this car, it was quite easy because nobody interrupted. And, we made the car around the shape, which is very unusual. For instance, the cowl of the car, the base of the screen is cantilevered over the engine because that's the shape I wanted. Now, in most cases, I would have been forced to bring that back so the engine would be fully exposed. But I was fairly insistent that it had to be what it was going to be, and that was it.
Superb. I guess that spontaneity design these days is a lot harder given all the regulations. Whereas if you go back 50, 60 years, they can produce whatever they wanted in the 50s and 60s. There were some unbelievable designs, but I guess there weren't the limitations which there are now. So they're really interesting.
That is so true. And you think of all the wonderful Italian show cars of the 60s, yep. And like the original Stratus show car. I mean, just a wonderful piece of art. And a lot of those Lamborghinis of the time, the show cars, and the Bertone ones in particular, and the Lamborghini Bravo show car, tremendous cars. Could you build them now? Probably. Well, certainly the original show car Stratus you could never build anyway because it had the door at the front. But are you just to pass regulations now on those shapes would be nigh enough impossible, to be honest. So they were the golden years of innovation and design and artistry, really. Much more difficult now. You're dictated in so many areas by dimensions and physics and safety requirements.
And you have, of course, had a fantastic 20-year career at Jaguar, bringing in a whole new design style and arguably rejuvenating the brand. Indeed, you're responsible for the design of some of the most important cars in Jaguar's recent history, including the F-Type, the successor to the iconic E-Type, the F-Pace, the first Jaguar crossover SUV. And last year, you stepped down from Jaguar and have set up a new design engineering firm called Callum. Can you tell us a bit about your new business?
Well, it sort of started off in a bit of a whim, really, because I bought myself a Vanquish. I'd never owned a car that I designed. And they don't give me one, by the way. I have to buy them. But and so I looked at it and thought, no, it's time to give this car a bit of a revamp. It never got a facelift. And so I set about redesigning it for my own, personal satisfaction, really. And then I got together with some friends, including David Fairbairn, and he said, well, let's make a business case out of this car. We'll produce a few and I'll at least pay for your facelift. And I said, okay, so that's how that happened. And then towards the time of actually leaving the company, he said, well, let's turn this into a business and this will be our first project. So we kind of discussed it. But the point in Callum Design, or Callum as we call it, is it's all about designing bespoke items. And it's not just cars, incidentally. We'll be doing other things. And really, it's about having a bit of fun. It may sound a bit indulgent, but I've done 40 odd years of production cars, and albeit some quite exotic ones. But I just felt the need to go and have a bit of fun with things which didn't really matter hugely in the big corporate world. That were a little bit more for individuals, and that's what this car is about. And so I approached VC25, as we call it, with a view that what would I do with the car now, having learned so much more about design, having technology that I didn't have then, and having the opportunity to just recreate things that weren't quite right. And so that's what that car is all about. And it's sort of, I say it's a one-off. We're building 25, but I'm not going to go back and do a back catalogue of all the cars that I've worked on and do the same thing. This really was my most special one that I enjoyed. So I thought I'll do it with this one. And then
Interesting.
we'll move on to other things.
And why was the Vanquish specifically the one you chose? You've obviously got the DB7, I guess the DB9, all the Jaguars. Was the Vanquish special for you personally for a particular reason?
Yeah, it was. For what I said before, I had a free run at that car. There was very, very little influence from any corporate side at all. And Bob Dover, bless him, he really supported me on every inch of the way with it. So I probably had more freedom with that car than any other car I've designed, except perhaps I-Pace. That was another one. And so maybe a Callum I-Pace one day, who knows? But so yeah, it always struck me as being a car that I personally loved. And of course, when I bought one, I kind of fell for it even more. So.
I saw the car back at the London Classic Car Show in February, and it's just astounding what you've done. Maybe you could tell us about some of the changes and the design elements that you've incorporated in the car, and how you went about redesigning them.
Yeah, well, it kind of started off as a styling exercise. We've redone the front end. It's more modern. It's more assertive. I don't like the word. There's a lot of aggressive cars out there. I don't like the word aggressive. I don't think it's very British. So I think it should be assertive. And we've redesigned the rear bumper with a diffuser on it, which actually works very well. And we redesigned all the details, like the window surrounds are all new, and the mirrors are new, wheels are new. The whole stance is better. The car sits lower. It's got a wider track. It's got bigger wheels, of course. And it's all these little details, the sum of the parts of which makes up to something much, much better. And these are little details that you understand will make a difference in the totality of it. But I'm not one. I love cars. I'm not one just to kind of make things look prettier. I was very keen that this car would live up to its promise. So we've done a lot of engineering work in the car. Adam Don Francesco's our chief engineer, and he has done a lot of work on the chassis work. The engine is 60, 70 horsepower more. We've put equal length headers on it. There's done mapping on it, some cylinder head work done on it. So it has some more horsepower, but more importantly, it handles better, it steers better, it drives better, and we're offering a manual box as well as an extra if a customer wished it, as well as a full automatic. So there's a choice of the original or the other two boxes. And so our objective was to really take that car, which was fundamentally very good, and turn it into a 21st century car.
And you mentioned about some of the details. I remember you're looking at, as I said, the car and the classic car show in February. I noticed things like I think there's the Bremont watch in the interior, and you've also got a David Bowie reference on the fuel filler cap.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's lots of little things like that, and we've got mulberry bags in the back. We did a bag with mulberry, and we've designed what I call my fragmented tartan. Something I always wanted to do was to create a tartan, so we've created something which you see running through the car and the baggage and the luggage. Yeah, the Bremont. I've always had a great personal and working relationship with the Bremont watch company and the English brothers who run it. And we did a lot of work with them, with Jaguar, of course, in the past. And I just continue that relationship with this car. And we've created this wonderful, literally this watch together, which sits in the car, and you can take it out and take it away with you. It's a mechanical watch, so you have to drive the car to make it work, which is quite a bit of fun. So it's just that lovely relationship with other British brands that we're nurturing for good reason. So good working relationship with Bremont. They're a great company, great watch company. They build fantastic products. And the Bowie reference, well, I've always been a great Bowie fan. I think most people of my generation probably were. But I remember at some point we were having some discussions on, and I won't go into details of the car, and I was feeling particularly assertive about getting my own way on something. And I said, no, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this regardless. And somebody said, what are you going to put in the filler cap? And I said, well, Rebel, Rebel. That's the way I've always seen life. So one of my favorite Bowie songs.
Superb.
I've always pushed against the grain. So that's the way that's the way I am.
Yeah. And I guess with the Vanquish 25, it's not just a design change. It's a full package with the performance, which you mentioned there as well. Do you think that whole change has changed the character of the car, or is it still got the same original Vanquish feel to it?
You know what's interesting with the car? When I looked at it, I thought, this car could sit today amongst all that other traffic if you could take away all its foibles and its shortcomings. And so what we've done is we've effectively brought it into 21st century. And once you do all the detail work that belongs to modern cars, including the lamps, of course, and not mention interior, the interior is completely redesigned. It does bring the car in the 21st century. So you're capturing a little bit of the spirit, a lot of the spirit of the original. It's still there, but it's something you could probably bring out today quite happily and say it's a new car. So because we've caught up on all the detail work that showed its age. So it's just a nice combination of yesterday and today, but it's still got its presence. Trust me. In fact, it's got more presence than anything ever. And that's something I really wanted to do. Was the car had great presence, but I knew it could be more. And the next car we're just about to finish, you'll see that quite soon. that's going to have a lot of impact.
That's my next question, actually. When can we maybe see the Vanquish 25 by Callum on the road?
Quite soon, within the next month or so, I think. I don't think I'm saying anything out of term yet, but I think the next month or so you'll see it on the road. We'll have people driving it. We're building car number 3, which is a combination of our chassis car plus our beauty car, as we called it. So it's to be a fully fledged drivable car, which, as I say, has a lot of visual impact. So I think within the next few weeks you will be seeing that.
Yep.
Hopefully you'll get a drive of it. I'm sure we'll probably manage that.
Don't offer me that. I'll be on your doorstep immediately. And after these remastered Vanquishes, you mentioned you weren't going to go back through your back catalogue doing a similar process. What would be your next project with Callum?
Funny enough, we were joking about that. We talked about doing a Ford Puma because I designed that car while I was at TWR, which was quite a bit of fun. But I'm not sure the business case for Ford Puma would work very well. But it would be a fun car to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm talking about the old one, of course. No, we've got some furniture coming. We're doing some watch work. We're doing other projects, and we're doing other car projects, which will see the light of day in due course. And we've got a lot of people interested in asking me to do certain things for them. This lockdown's not been easy. I think people have been reluctant to step out and say, let's get on with this. I think people are waiting for the green light to get on with life. But I'm sure that once that happens, we're going to be very busy with individual requests and design studies. Yeah.
Superb. And I'm conscious of your time. To end with, we have some quick fire questions. So first of all, your favorite car you've designed to date?
So it's a bit like asking who your favorite child is. I think the I-Pace probably. I love the F-Type. I drive an F-Type every day still, and it's really quite a beautiful car. And the team that I worked with, and I have to give the team credit for most of the stuff that I've been credited for because they've just been brilliant. But the I-Pace is the one that was a personal journey for me because I wanted to create something different, given the freedom of the electric platform. And even, the car is 2, 3 years old now. It still stands in its own place. So, and it's very individual and works. So that's my favorite one at the moment.
I have to say, I'm a sort of Aston man through and through. But when the I-Pace and the F-Type came out, I have to say I was sort of looking the other way and thinking, maybe I should try these Jaguars. But beautiful cars. And my next question is British or Italian design?
Well, I think during the 50s and 60s, definitely Italian design. And that's when, I kind of grew up and was influenced by so much of it, as well as incidentally American GM design. That was a great influence on me too. You think of what GM was doing at that point with Mitchell. That was a great era for design in terms of car design. But Italians are, but later on, British designers around the world have created some great cars. And I still think that British design still kind of dominates worldwide design in so many ways. If you look around any of the top design studios, you'll find a Brit in there somewhere, having a great influence on it all. So I think latterly British design it's got a bit of a leadership. I'll probably get a lot of hate mail for saying that, but I think it is.
And then classic or modern cars?
I love them all. I've got a lot of cars myself, which are nothing too exotic, but I love them for the reasons that I loved them when I was growing up. Modern cars are just completely different entities now. I hope they're never seen by too many as just commodities, but they're such clever objects. They're the most complicated things in the world. They're as complicated as jet airliners, believe me. And yet we just take them for granted. So modern car technology is just phenomenal. And I don't think we really understand how good they are. So I have a love for both. There's a place for both.
Okay. And I think you mentioned some of the cars you have, but what's currently in your garage?
Well, classic-wise, I've got a Mini Cooper. I've got the Vanquish. I've got an XJ Coupe, which is one of my favorites. A couple of American cars. I've got a Chevy pickup truck, 72. I've got a Ford Hot Rod, 1932 Ford Model B Juice Coupe, one of my favorites. A TR6, probably my favorite car to drive, actually. Beetle convertible, the old one, of course. I've got an Escort RS 2000, which is just a fun thing. Yeah, I kind of lose count of them really. An Alfa Romeo GTV, the Bertone one, the Giugiaro one.
Yep, I've got one of those as well. Actually, I've got a GT
Beautiful little
Junior though.
car. Yeah, I'm having a twin spark engine put into it at the moment, which should be quite hairy.
Yep.
So yeah, I've got a few, but a nice mix of cars that I've always liked and wanted to own, and they're just a joy to drive, really.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then connected question, it's our last question, but money no object, and unfortunately excluding cars you've designed, what is your ultimate free car garage?
Free car garage money object. Well, I'd have the hot rod, which I have anyway. I'd have a Mini Cooper, which I have, and money no object. I'd have a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari. Absolutely.
Great. One of my favorite cars as well.
Beautiful thing. And I've been very fortunate to drive a couple of very special ones, and just a wonderful car to drive.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Ian. That's been a fascinating insight into your world of car design. While some of your Aston Martin designs are already some of my favorite ever cars, I think hearing from you today has cemented their rightful place at the very top. So thank you so much. And I'm excited to track the Vanquish 25s and indeed all your future projects with Callum going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. No, it's been fun. That's been fun. Thank you very much.
Great.